There are whispers in the quiet corners of America, stories that cling to the humid air of the South and echo through the crisp, clear nights of the Midwest. They speak of moments when the fabric of the ordinary frays, revealing something far more sinister underneath. Something that can seep into your life, unannounced, and unravel everything you thought you knew. This isn't a bedtime story, not really. It's the kind of tale that makes you check the locks on your doors a second time, that makes the static on your radio sound a little less random, a little more deliberate. Imagine a life meticulously crafted. A life built on the foundations of routine, of predictability, of the comforting hum of domestic bliss. That was Sarah's life, or so she believed. Sarah was a woman of 38, her laughter, a melodious cascade that could fill any room. Her hair, a rich auburn, often caught the sunlight in a way that made it seem alive, dancing around her shoulders. She had eyes that held a kindness, a gentle curiosity that hinted at a deeper soul, but also a quiet strength that had carried her through the mundane challenges of adulthood. She lived in a quaint, two-story house nestled in a tree-lined suburb just outside of Richmond, Virginia. The kind of place where neighborhood barbecues were a regular event, where children's bicycles lay haphazardly on driveways, and the scent of freshly cut grass was a constant companion. Her husband, Mark, was a steady, dependable presence, a man whose gentle humor and unwavering support were the anchors of her world. He was a civil engineer, his mind as orderly and structured as the bridges he helped design. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance that settled into a deep, enduring love, culminating in a marriage that, to all outward appearances, was idyllic. They shared a comfortable silence, a shorthand of shared glances and knowing smiles. Their evenings often consisted of Mark reading by the fire, his glasses perched on his nose, while Sarah meticulously tended to her beloved orchid collection, the vibrant blooms a testament to her patient and nurturing spirit. They had plans, grand and small, a trip to Italy next spring, renovating the guest bathroom, growing old together on their front porch, watching the world go by. But beneath the polished veneer of this perfect life, a subtle discord had begun to play. It wasn't a jarring note, not yet, but a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, like the first crack appearing in a perfectly smooth pane of glass. It started innocuously enough, with the radio. Sarah had always loved the radio. During her morning commute, stuck in the predictable snarl of traffic on I-64, it was her companion. She tuned into the same local talk show every day, a low-key program hosted by a man with a soothing baritone voice, known only as the Night Owl. He discussed everything from local politics to obscure historical facts, peppered with calls from listeners sharing their opinions or seeking advice. It was background noise, comforting and familiar. Until one Tuesday morning. The show was halfway through its segment on forgotten American inventions when the Night Owl's voice, usually so steady, seemed to pause, almost imperceptibly. Then, a slight shift in tone, a deliberate slowing of his cadence. "We have a caller," he announced, his voice now imbued with an unusual gravity, "who wishes to remain anonymous, but who has a rather unique observation to share." Sarah, absently tapping her fingers on the steering wheel to the rhythm of the windshield wipers, barely registered it. Until the voice from the speaker, a woman's voice, raspy and strained, began to speak. I heard something," the caller stammered, her words laced with a palpable fear. "Something. About the woman from the old house on Willow Creek Lane. The one with the red door. They said her name was Eleanor. And they knew what she did." Sarah's breath hitched. Willow Creek Lane. The red door. That was where her grandmother had lived, decades ago, a house steeped in childhood memories, now sold and long gone. And Eleanor? Her great-aunt's name, a woman she barely remembered, shrouded in whispers of a tragic, mysterious past her family rarely spoke of. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine. It was a coincidence, she told herself, a strange, unsettling one, but a coincidence nonetheless. The caller must have been talking about someone else, another Eleanor, another house with a red door. Richmond wasn't that small. The following morning, the feeling intensified. Sarah was once again in her car, the familiar hum of the engine a small comfort. The night owl was on, discussing the rising cost of living. Then, a commercial break, followed by the familiar, slightly distorted sound of a new collar being patched through. This time, the voice was different. A man's, deep and gravelly. "I'm calling," he began, his words slow and measured, "about the woman who loves orchids. The one who drives a silver sedan. She's worried about her husband's late nights." Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She loved orchids. She drove a silver sedan. Mark had been working late, more than usual, his explanations becoming increasingly vague. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach. It was getting too specific. Too close. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. It felt like a spotlight, suddenly shining directly on her, a chilling recognition that her private world was no longer quite so private. The air in the car seemed to thicken, pressing in on her, and the voice on the radio, once a source of comfort, now felt like an unseen eye, watching, waiting. And then, the caller uttered the words that would forever shatter her carefully constructed reality, spoken with a quiet certainty that brooked no doubt, and her name is Sarah. This was it. The moment where the mundane cracked, revealing the abyss beneath. The comfortable silence of her marriage, the predictable rhythm of her days, all now tainted by an insidious intrusion. Who is this person? How did they know? And what, precisely, did they want? The questions swirled in her mind, a dizzying vortex of fear and confusion. The serene suburban landscape outside her window suddenly seemed menacing, the familiar houses hiding unknown secrets, the gentle breeze carrying whispers she couldn't quite decipher. Sarah felt a profound, unsettling shift, as if a vital piece of her reality had been subtly altered, leaving her disoriented and vulnerable. The world, once a place of order and light, now held an ominous, creeping shadow. And the source of that shadow, she instinctively knew, was the disembodied voice on the radio, a voice that had just spoken her name, and in doing so, had initiated a game she didn't know she was playing. Sarah's name, spoken by an unknown voice on the radio, wasn't just a word. It was a gash, deep and cold, that tore through the tranquility she had so carefully built. The day that followed was a blur of confusion and disorientation. Sarah couldn't focus on anything. Her beloved orchids seemed to fade from view, and Mark's voice, when he called to say he would be working late again, seemed to echo from a great distance. His voice, which usually brought comfort, now only heightened her anxiety. "An urgent project," he said. "I'm sorry, my love, but I have to stay." The words sounded plausible, but in the cold light of her new suspicion, they sounded like a clumsy lie, a mantra repeated to conceal something. That night, when Mark came home, the smell of stale coffee and a deep weariness were etched on his face. Sarah wanted to confront him, to ask him about the late nights, about the feeling of being watched, but the words caught in her throat. She was afraid of his answer. She was afraid of what she might find. So, instead of asking, she watched him carefully, every detail. She noticed a small scratch on his hand that she had never seen before. She realized he had changed his usual shirt, and the scent of his cologne was gone, replaced by a strange, faint woody aroma. She pretended that nothing was amiss, but in her mind, a list of unspoken questions was growing. The first clues began to appear subtly. That night, she found a strange key in Mark's desk drawer. It didn't belong to any lock in their house, and it was attached to a small keychain shaped like an owl, the symbol of the Night Owl radio show. It could have been another coincidence, a gift from someone, but her heart told her otherwise. She slipped it into her coat pocket, deciding to keep it a secret. Suspicion was like a poison. It began to seep into every corner of her life, distorting what was once familiar. The following day, Sarah's obsession with the radio reached a new peak. She still listened, but not for comfort. Now, she listened like a hypnotized mouse, drawn into its invisible trap. And then, it happened again. The night owl's voice came on, and another caller, an elderly woman's voice, trembling, talked about an old photograph. "I saw a photo," the woman said, "at the library. An old picture, taken at a horse race. The man, He had a very uneasy look on his face, as if he knew something was about to happen. Sarah hadn't been to a horse race, but her grandmother had. And her grandmother often talked about a tragic horse race where a man had died mysteriously, falling from his horse. Her family had always believed it was an accident. But then the caller continued, and in the background, the woman whispered, there was a little girl. She was holding a little green toy car. The blood in Sarah's body seemed to freeze. A little green toy car. It was her favorite toy as a child. A toy she had carried with her everywhere. She remembered very clearly holding it in her hand as she sat in the back seat of the car, waiting for her grandmother to return after the race. That photo, she remembered seeing it in her grandmother's old family album. It was torn and old, but she could clearly recall the image of herself clutching the toy car. How could a stranger on the radio know this? The tension in their marriage began to build, like a ticking bomb. Mark became more distant, sometimes looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, a mix of guilt and fear. One night, while he was asleep, Sarah secretly went through his phone. She found messages with an unnamed number. The messages were short, coded, but enough to break her heart. Meet at the rendezvous. Don't get exposed. The photo has been destroyed. She's starting to get suspicious. Sarah felt like she was standing on a thin sheet of ice, and it was cracking. The fear of Mark's secret was greater than the fear of the radio voice. They seemed to be connected, like two ends of the same thread. Her relationship with Mark was unraveling, torn apart by suspicion. His every touch felt like a lie. Every word had a hidden meaning. She began to search for information about her grandmother's horse race incident. She went to the local library, where she found a copy of an old newspaper. The man's accident was mentioned briefly, and it was concluded as a tragic accident. Nothing unusual. But when she looked at the date, her heart sank. That date, over 30 years ago, was also the day her mother, whom she had never met, had died. The family had always said her mother died in a car accident. The coincidence was too great. When she returned home, emotionally exhausted, she found Mark waiting for her at the door, his face grim. He was holding the owl keychain. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and full of disappointment. "Did you take this from my drawer?" It wasn't a question, but an accusation. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time, she saw a terrible fear in them. Not a fear for himself, but a fear for her. "What did you hear on the radio?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And did you go through my phone?" Sarah backed away. The confrontation had finally happened. The black hole she had sensed was now fully revealed, and she was standing right on its edge. The voice on the radio, the key, the coded messages, and now her mother's mysterious death, they were all threads tightening around her in a web of lies. Mark, the man she had trusted, was at the center of it all. She had fallen into a sophisticated trap, a trap that had been set long before she realized, and now she was completely caught. She looked into the eyes of Mark, the man she had married, and in that moment, she knew that she had married a secret, not a man. And that secret, it didn't just belong to him, it belonged to her, and it would change her life forever. The air in the room was thick, suffocated by unspoken words. Sarah stood there, the owl keychain in Mark's hand like irrefutable evidence. His eyes, once a place where she found peace, now reflected a profound despair. "How much do you know?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse, devoid of any warmth. Sarah looked at him. She didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. Her silence was the answer, and it was the most bitter accusation. Mark sighed, a heavy, weary sigh, as if he was finally shedding a burden that had weighed him down for a long time. "I can't hide it from you anymore," he said, and those words opened a door to an abyss Sarah never imagined. Mark wasn't a civil engineer. At least, not entirely. He was a private investigator, working secretly for an organization that specialized in cold cases. One of those cases, a case he had been pursuing for years, was the horse race incident that had killed that man. And it was connected to Sarah's family. The accident wasn't an accident. It was an assassination, perfectly covered up. Mark had been hired to find evidence, to bring the culprits to light. The man was a journalist, Mark explained, his voice full of sorrow. He had enough evidence to take down a massive smuggling ring involving some wealthy families around here, including some of your relatives. Sarah's heart seemed to stop. Wealthy families. Her relatives. She remembered the stories of her family's mysterious wealth, the unexpectedly profitable deals, the expensive antiques that appeared out of nowhere. She had always thought it was due to luck. Now, everything seemed to be explained. But my toy car and my mother. She stammered. Mark backed away, his eyes full of pain. When I started the investigation, I found out that your mother, whom you believed died in a car accident, didn't. She was kidnapped that night, right after the murder took place. She was a witness. And they killed her. A scream was caught in Sarah's throat. Her mother, the woman she had never known, but always felt a void for in her heart, had been murdered. She had always believed her mother's death was a heartbreaking tragedy, a twist of fate. Now, she knew it was a brutal, premeditated crime. The people on the radio. She whispered, a sense of horror seeping through every cell. Who are they? Mark bowed his head. They're part of that organization, he said, his voice barely audible. They're the trackers. They're using that radio show as a way to send coded messages to each other, to track our every move. They knew I was investigating, and they knew I was married to you. They're playing a game. The game is to warn me. And now, to threaten you. A sudden twist, a shocking revelation, that changed the entire story. Sarah and Mark's relationship wasn't a love story, but part of a conspiracy. Mark had married her to gain easier access to her family's secrets. He had used her. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. The feeling of betrayal was more painful than the brutal truth. She backed away, looking at the man she had once loved so deeply, and now she only saw a stranger, a demon. You lied to me, she said, her voice only a whisper. You used me. Mark shook his head, a tear rolling down his cheek. No, Sarah. Maybe it started that way. But then I fell in love with you. My love for you is real. I tried to protect you from all of this, but I failed. I tried to end the investigation, but they won't let me. They know I love you and they're using you as a hostage. Just then, a call came to Mark's phone. He looked at the screen, his face ashen. Don't answer it, Sarah said, her voice cold. But he did. He listened for a moment, and then his face distorted. He hung up, looking at Sarah with a look of utter desperation. They've kidnapped your father, he said. They know I'm here. And they have a condition. If I don't hand over all the evidence I have, they will kill him. The conflict reached its peak. Sarah had to face an incredible choice. Trust the man who had lied to her, or hand over her father to a criminal organization. She looked at Mark, the man who had once been her whole world, who had brought her into a life of danger, and in that moment, she understood that she had no choice but to enter this game. The game that the voice on the radio had started. The room fell into a dead silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of Sarah and Mark. The desperation in Mark's eyes had changed. It had become determined, like a warrior preparing for a final battle. He handed Sarah the owl keychain, the symbol of his deception, and said, "You have to go. Now. I'll stay here and do what they want. I'll buy you time." Sarah couldn't believe her ears. The man who had lied to her, who had brought her into this quagmire, now wanted to sacrifice himself to save her. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, Mark. I'm not leaving you. We'll do this together. She understood that she had no choice but to trust him. Her trust had been shattered, but she knew he was her only hope to save her father. Mark looked at her, and a bitter smile appeared on his lips. They won't let us get away. You have to use this. He pointed to the keychain. Sarah realized that this wasn't an ordinary keychain. It was a data storage device containing all the evidence Mark had collected. Give it to the police. They have enough information to arrest the people behind all of this, Mark said. Sarah hesitated. What about my dad? She asked, her voice choked. I'll take care of him, Mark said, his voice full of resolve. Trust me this one time, Sarah. I won't let them get you. Sarah understood that she didn't have much time. She nodded, hugging Mark in a rush, feeling his warmth and weight for the last time. Then she ran out, plunging into the cold night. She drove frantically, leaving behind the house that had once been her safe haven, now a battlefield. The voice on the radio still echoed in her mind, like a curse. Her name is Sarah. Sarah arrived at the police station. She handed over the USB containing all the evidence. The police didn't believe her until they checked the USB and discovered all the classified documents about the smuggling ring, the audio recordings, the photos, all meticulously coded. Immediately, a large-scale investigation was launched. They found Sarah's father, held in an old warehouse on the outskirts. He was safe. But when Sarah returned to the house, Mark was no longer there. The outcome of the story wasn't entirely tragic, but it wasn't entirely a happy ending either. The criminal organization was brought down. The people who had killed her mother and kidnapped her father were brought to justice. Justice was served, but the price was too high. Mark had disappeared. The police found his car abandoned at a port, and they assumed he had been killed. However, his body was never found. Sarah returned to her life, but everything had changed forever. She was no longer the naive woman who believed in a perfect life. She had survived a nightmare, a game she never knew she was playing. She had learned that, even in the most peaceful moments, there are hidden secrets, dark stories that only the brave can face. Her life continued, but every morning, when she drove to work, she would unconsciously turn on the radio. She still listened to the familiar voice of the night owl, but now she listened with a new understanding, a new respect for the secrets it concealed. She was no longer afraid. She had become a part of that story. And in the most quiet moments, she still believed that Mark was alive, somewhere, and that he would return. Don't let stories like this just be a whisper in the wind. Share this story with your friends, like this video, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other mysterious stories. And remember, sometimes, the voice on the radio might just know your name.